This is the time for us to give in. I believe you have received your handouts, so please make sure that you do have the handouts. For those of you who are observing through the internet, the handouts after the meeting is over, we will upload on the website of the NAIC, so please download afterwards. The chairman, please. Ladies and gentlemen, we would now like to begin the second meeting of NAIC. It's been 1 month since the NAIC has been launched, and the Secretariat, by and by, have been able to be well developed. I am very encouraged with this. Right now, we have 57 staffs in the Secretariat. There are various ways of how to engage in their job, which is something we cannot avoid. But I'm sure everyone is enthusiastic and sharing the same awareness in engaging in their job for the NAIC. Apart from the 10 staff from the National Diet Library, as well as from the 2 diet houses, all the others are from the private sector. We would like to sincerely respond to the expectation of the Japanese people. We would like to sincerely be engaged in our investigation. There is one thing I would like to consult with you in regards to the proceeding of the NAIC. Please look at the handout 1. We need to designate the acting chairman. This is always an important issue. According to Article 2, paragraph 5 of the NAIC Act, I have designated Ambassador Oshima to be the acting chairman. I have already reported to you the last time. For the co-chairs of the working group, we have several times consulted with the members. We have established 4 working groups. The mandate had been given by the Diet, and based upon the instruction from the Diet, working at the group 1, which is the investigation on the accident working group, we would like to ask Mr. Ishibashi and Dr. Tanaka to be the members. For working group 2, which is working group on investigation into the damages, we would like to have Ms. Sakiyama and Mr. Yokoyama to be the members. For the working group 3, the working group on policy investigation, we would like to have Ambassador Oshima and Mr. Sakurai. Now, for the working group, members alone will not be able to make the investigation. So as for the qualification as well as makeup of the investigators, I would like to consult with the co-chairs and to have the co-chairs to approve on those investigators. I'm sure there are many nominations, and we would like to go through the process I have described. Is it all right? Thank you. Then that is how we would like to proceed with the NAIC, the process. Perhaps there may be something to be reported on another opportunity. Now, as the program of proceedings describe, there are several items that we need to address. There have been many developments since the March 11th, when the Fukushima accident occurred. There has been many news reports, and there are reports that are being published by different parties, as well as by independent organizations. In December, there had been a report coming from important major commission. There are also other committees, and we would very much like to hear, especially Dr. Hatamura, who is the chair of the Investigation Committee on the Accident of the Fukushima Nuclear Power Stations of Tokyo Electric Power Company, which is the Government Investigation Committee. And since interim, a report has been published by the Government Investigation Committee, we have asked Dr. Hatamura, the chairman, and Mr. Ogawa, the Secretariat Director. This is the Investigation Committee as established by the government. on the 26th of December, they have published the interim report. And many of you may have already read this report, and I'm sure the members have already seen the report. Now, as to the time allocation, we are planning to have 1 hour or so. Thank you very much, Dr. Hatamura and Mr. Agawa, for coming. And I'm sure you have gone through very hard work because the interim report is indeed voluminous. Now, the members have already had read the report. And as has been reported in many places, what was the motivation in accepting the chairmanship of the investigation committee? What were your reasons? And what was the role of the committee as you have seen it to be? And inclusive of the outline of the report, the structure, the strategy in drafting the interim report. If you could share with us your thoughts for 20 to 30 minutes, and then have questions and answers later on. My name is Yotaro Hatamura. I serve as the chairman of the Investigation Committee on the Accident at the Fukushima nuclear power stations of Tokyo Electric Power Company. I have agreed to share with you my views at this NAIIC meeting, but first of all, there is a disclaimer that I would like to register as to my statements today. Now, as to what has been made clear and discovered through the process of the government's investigation committee, and how the committee itself is assessing those findings, what our investigation committee could disclose officially have already been put in the interim report. Everything has been put into the interim report. But as you can see, it is very voluminous. So if you would like to sincerely read the interim report, I don't think you can just read in just 1 or 2 days. The 500 pages of report in writing, and there are also the data attached, which is 200 pages long. So I don't think in an ordinary way, if you would like to read in detail, you cannot easily and readily read it. But if you would like to know about the outline, there is an executive summary being attached. So if you could please refer to the executive summary for the important points. And the executive summary has been translated into English, so the foreigners can also be able to read the summary segment in English. Now, as to the findings of our investigation and assessment thereof, if there are anything that I may mention today which is not included in the interim report, please understand that those are my strictly personal views and not the view of the investigation committee itself, because we are still continuing our investigation and still engaged in a discussion and debate. If you would misunderstand that it is an official position of the investigation committee, our debate at the investigation committee may be stymied. But I would like to be as much as possible be straightforward and make my comments in detail. So please understand that those which are not included in the interim report are strictly my personal view. Now, in accepting to be the chair of the investigation committee, there were basic points that I have thought through. So let me, first of all, explain my basic policy. There are 8 items, 8 points, as mentioned in Chapter 1 of the interim report. First is, investigation should be conducted based on HATAMURA's approach. Without any explanation, some people may misunderstand that I may be doing something as I like, arbitrarily. That is not the case. Ordinarily, you may have some established notions as to how the investigation on any accident may be conducted. But we need to adopt unconventional approach in order to learn lessons from the actual facts and look at the accident from such a perspective. And that is the reason why I have stated right at the beginning that the investigation should be conducted based on HATAMURA's approach. Secondly, we need to consider our responsibility to our descendants, to our posterity, that the investigation should withstand critical evaluation in 100 years of time, because this was a major accident. So 10 years from now, 50 years from now, or even 100 years from now, there may be many reviews to be made on the accident. So after a century or so, I hope that somebody would not say that these things should have been noticed and should have been put into words and record. I wanted to make sure that there was nothing important missing from the report, so that 100 years from now, the people who read the report would think that we have done well, that we have properly done our job. And thirdly, adequately answer all questions of the Japanese people. In other words, we would like to have Japanese people to be convinced, to feel comfortable with the report. I myself have been involved in several accident investigation commissions. I have been the members on investigation of some major accidents, for instance, including the investigation on the review of the accident at the Fukushima railways. But we need to provide explanation which will be readily accepted by the surviving families of the victims as well as the victims themselves. That I have always felt keenly to be important. And fourthly, I have mentioned that adequately answer all the questions harbored by people all over the world, because this major accident, directly and indirectly, have caused significant trouble and nuisance to people all over the world. And people all over the world have many doubts and questions, and basically we need to respond and answer to all those questions. The fifth point is, investigation committee will not seek to hold any particular person or organization responsible. Later on, I would like to explain this point in more of a detail. Point number 6, accurately understand the very essence of the accident that occurred. Many accidents, when we write the causes and the consequences, and also to write in the lessons learned, people think that that's it, that's adequate for any report. But I thought that we need to describe the phenomenon themselves. This is quite important. And point number 7, understand the background of the phenomenon that occurred. The factors in the background are important, although those factors do not come to the surface, but there were many important developments in the background which may not be readily visible, not coming to the surface, which may be actually neglected and missed, but still very important. So I have emphasized that we need to understand the physical, not only the physical events, but shed light on the background to try to make more visible what is actually not coming to the surface, but also that may be relevant to the accident. Point number 8, it is necessary to conduct an experiment that replicates the accident and to preserve objects in dynamic conditions. Now, replicating or reconstructing in the experiment may be difficult to understand, or to preserving in dynamic conditions may be quite an unusual concept, but I believe that these are very important. People question that to use a nuclear reactor, and are you going to conduct a significant experiment? And that is impossible. But when I say that if we are to reconstruct in the experiment, what we need to clarify is there are certain elements being interrelated with each other, which may cause a certain phenomenon. We need to simplify the phenomenon to have a replicated experiment to try to find out what has actually happened, what are the relationship between those elements. We needed to have a good recognition. Unless we have the reconstruction experiment, these cannot be clarified. So this is quite important. I have also mentioned that we need to have preservation in dynamic conditions. Now, people who may simplistically think that as the nuclear reactor is still in operation, would we leave it as they are and preserve it as they are? That is not what I am suggesting, because it is the nuclear power plant who have caused the accident, and they were to produce electricity. So we need to preserve the actual physical objects so that we can recall and remember afterwards at appropriate timing, that we will be able to review on that. And that is the reason why I have said, using the phrase preservation in dynamic conditions. In an ordinary accident, this is something inconceivable, but in having the investigation into accident, what we need to do is to learn the lessons and prevent any recurrence of the accident, but not only those. We need to factor in to our future activities all the factors which are indeed relevant and important. So, to learn from the accident, if we are to do it properly, this 8th point is very necessary. As for the details, please refer to the interim report. But today, I would like to emphasize the point which is very important in trying to conduct the investigation by the committee, which is not to pursue any responsibility. Let me explain in detail. When we handle an accident, inquire into cause, bring to light the causes, and pursuing responsibility, these two processes may be in contradiction with each other. Many people, however, think that both must be dealt with, trying to bring into light what were the causes and also to pursue the responsibility. But if we are to genuinely inquire into the causes and to have the people involved in the accident to explain to us very frankly and candidly the actual facts, what has happened, and what were their thinking and thoughts, what were the actions being taken. If they are afraid of being pursued the responsibility, they may not be telling us all the truth. It is impossible then to have the comprehensive view, the holistic view of the accident. So the investigation committee have decided on the policy that we would not be engaged in any investigation or verification with the purpose of pursuing the responsibility. And we have always explained that policy before interviewing the people. And we have also conducted enormous number of interviews. And let me explain the position in conducting the interviews. The interviews of the parties directly involved in the accident have accounted for very important and large weight in our investigation. The number of those people who have been interviewed as of 16th of December was 456. We are still continuing to have these interviews. The interviews have been mainly conducted by Secretariat, but for the important people, the members of the investigation committee have also been involved. As a chair, I have also involved in the interview to Mr. Yoshida, the site superintendent of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. In our investigation committee, according to our agreement, we have made these interviews as a principle not to be disclosed to the outside. For the closed session on the interviews, we, apart from those which needed to be put into the interim report, after going through careful review, as a principle, we will not make it public. There were cases where the parties being interviewed may request to be disclosed, and in such a case we could disclose the content of the interview. But so far all the interviews were done in a closed manner. That is the principle, and not to disclose the content, because we wanted to pursue truth with the cooperation of the interviewees. We do not have any mandatory power for investigation, including the interviews. Everything is done through the voluntary cooperation of the people involved. So we need to make sure that what the interviewees have discussed through the interview not to be disclosed to any third party outside, because we wanted to establish relationship of trust and confidence with the interviewees in order for them to speak to us the truth. In order to gain the understanding of the interviewees, we have decided not to pursue their responsibility, and that is for the purpose of establishing this relationship of trust and confidence. Whenever in the interview, the comments to be made, there may be something to do with the privacy as well as the honor of the individuals, as well as it may, in certain cases, to do with the rights, for instance, on intellectual property rights, as well as information on the nuclear security, the physical protection, as well as safety maintenance. When and if such information is made public, it could cause major problems. And also, the interviewees may fear that what they may discuss, they may be disclosed to the outside, and they may not tell us truth. So after going through careful review, we have selected some of the comments made through the hearings, the interviews, to be put into the interim report. But other than that, we have not disclosed the content of the interviews, not to pursue the responsibility of the parties, and this is quite important and crucial. So these were the key points I wanted to mention right at the outset.
Thank you very much. So that was the background, and that was your philosophy. That's very like you, Dr. Hatamura. And as a result, that there is this voluminous materials of the Government Investigation Committee. I think there will be some questions from the NAIIC. Could we have 30 minutes or so? Indeed, it has gigantic work. To 400 old interviews, the interviewees, you conducted a hearing on them. That's a very valuable material. It must be very difficult, but thanks to your efforts, this report has been compiled. Concerning the overall matters, first, everyone, and you also mentioned, but the interim report is such a voluminous report. So even when it's issued, there's experts, journalists, for everybody, it must have been rather difficult to read it, and there will be many opinions, I believe, that will be voiced. So very roughly, you led such a big team, and you compiled the interim report. Concerning performance of the report, out of 100%, what would be the rate that you would give to your work? I've never been asked such a question. Out of 100 points, how would I rate this report? Perhaps 90 or 95? That's how I feel about the report. Why am I saying this? I started the work with a certain kind of target in my mind, but on the way, it was so difficult that I was afraid that I might not be able to reach the goal. There were certain occasions when I almost gave up. However, we were able to come thus far. Mr. Ogawa, who's sitting right next to me, and the members of the Secretariat, they were really extending backwards. Without their kind effort, we would not have reached thus far. Perhaps I'm indulgent to myself, but I would still say 90 or 95% out of 100. I see. You might feel that way. Towards the final report, there will be feedback and there will be many ideas that will be expressed. I have a lot of expectations on them. As we look at it, it was the committee commissioned by the government. So that's one aspect. And you said 90 or 95%. If that's how you feel, that's good. It's true that making a summary in the overview part, we read it, and at the end there are several issues. In a way, we could sort of be convinced as a result of this, but now it's difficult for us to have 100% expectation. Well, what about the readability? Is it easy to read? I'm just wondering how other people felt about the readability. So that's about the remaining 5%. As I was compiling the report, I was really reading them when it was still a text. Still, it was difficult for me to read it. While it was very difficult for me to read, we still had to organize them. By changing the sentences, or to make it readable, or we reorder them, could we make it easier for people to understand? That's one aspect, but if you make it too easy, it might become rather inaccurate. Then that would be inappropriate for interim report. We tried to revise them, but as we read them once again, then in many places we felt that it was better in the original text. There were parts that were difficult to understand, difficult to read, difficult to understand. By changing them, if one can read it, the better, that would be good, but at the moment, this is all we can do. Thank you. The members of the NAIIC, I'm pretty sure there will be some comments. Dr. Ishibashi, would you like to make a comment? Okay, Dr. Ishibashi. I'm Ishibashi, of the NAIIC. Thank you for your presentation. I'd like to ask you several questions, but the time is limited. And about the substance of the valuable interim report, I have one question. At the end, chapter 7, 9, in the summary part, you cited 3 factors that were deemed to have a huge impact on the damage and the accident. And number 2, you were referring to the lack of perspective of complex disaster. I think this is a very important point. And you mentioned that there was a lack of perspective of complex disaster. But in fact, that the nuclear accident could become a complex disaster, had been pointed out by many people, actually. However, society as a whole, that was ignored. As a result, amongst the people who are directly involved in nuclear power, that particular perspective was lacking. I really would like to ask you about the view by the investigation committee. I mean, that's not possible. Your personal view would be all right, but did you have that kind of understanding? Well, concerning this accident, earthquake occurred first, followed by tsunami, and then it evolved into a major disaster. Now, concerning the nuclear part, could we just think about earthquake? Or perhaps about tsunami, nothing was thought about. There was such a finding. And I really have to say this as my personal opinion, but in my personal opinion, how come people didn't think about tsunami? However, many people involved almost ignored the tsunami. They were just focused on earthquakes. And there were some people who actually pointed out that the earthquake would be followed by tsunami. Without addressing that, things could really go wrong. Some people said that. But people didn't take actions, and then we saw what happened in this accident. In looking at the accident in Fukushima, if we just focus on Fukushima, I don't think that would be appropriate. Our committee went to the north and south of the Fukushima nuclear power plant. For instance, Tohoku Electric Power Company had Onagawa nuclear power plant. We went there. And Tokai Daini nuclear power plant, we also went there as well. To the north of Fukushima nuclear power plant, the Tohoku Electric Power Company had a thermal power plant in Haramachi. We went there as well. What are the reasons? Of course, the earthquakes were considered, but was tsunami considered at the same time? If they had thought about the tsunami, what kind of countermeasures were taken? What kind of things were they thinking about? What kind of preparation was done? We wanted to think, we wanted to see with our own eyes and thought with our own minds. That's why we went there. Just like Fukushima, Onagawa power plant was hit by a major tsunami, but they were spared. It was not a major accident. Basically, I think that's because the major facilities were installed at a higher ground. However, concerning the Tokai Daini, only 6 months before the tsunami arrival, they had a construction of creating the water bar or kind of a dike, and which was very effective. That's why they didn't end up having an accident. So who did those things? Who thought about those things? Why did they do that? In that place, they focused not just on the earthquake, but they were concerned about the risks of tsunami. Setting aside whether they used the word complex disaster or said the word verbally, with the measures that were taken, they were spared from a major scale disaster. It's not just that there was a lack of perspective of complex disaster. In certain places, people were careful of that. They were aware of that, and they came up with measures, and they were successful. I'm not quite sure whether I'll answer to your question, but that's how I looked at the issue. I see. What I wanted to ask you was a bit different, actually. In the case of Japanese archipelago, on the very bottom of the ocean, if there is a major earthquake, that's likely to be followed by tsunami. Earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear accident. When those things occur at the same time, it's very difficult to bring the nuclear power accident under control. I think that was the region in the report. Yes, it was described in various other ways. So this is what I wanted to ask you. Regarding that perspective, That had been pointed out, but yeah, Japanese society as a whole, it was in a way ignored. And that's part of the big background of this accident, in my opinion. For instance, there are a group of scholars, group of researchers, including the SCJ, Science Council of Japan. There are various societies, congresses, mass media, and people in the judiciary. In a way, they ignored, and because of that effect, this perspective was ignored. So why did this happen? Why all these people who were concerned ignored this perspective concerning this mechanism of the Japanese society's structure? We really need to cut open these problems. There's a lack of perspective of complex disaster even after the 3/11. The mass media, judiciary, scholars, they continue to have that particular stance, and I think there are many people, the citizens of Japan, who want to see that problem cut open. This is an interim report, but to the extent I have read, but I think this is a bit thin. So that's not really cut open. For instance, 60, this is page 452, chapter 6, and then there is this particular item. It doesn't really scrape deep focus of disease in the society. Only looking at the nuclear administration, the nuclear safety administration, within that framework, there are issues. For instance, there are issues concerning what the government and the new municipality has been doing. You are referring to only those. Well, I share the same impression personally. Just focusing on what's right in front of us when it comes to the fundamental connection and what's beyond, the report did not really mention those things. I think that's your point. That's a very important issue. Someday, someone, somewhere, it has to do it somewhere. I think this has to be done sometime. But the committee like us, can we actually focus on all the problems, all the issues? I think that would be impossible. At the moment, we are just trying to start with accumulating facts where we can really check. Beyond, we haven't actually been there. We started with lofty words and answering everybody's question, but we haven't really answered any question. That's the point that has been made by many people, and I quite agree. But who was making what kind of decisions, and elucidating all those things and presenting facts? Our investigation hasn't really reached that level. Understood. Excuse me. Just as you said, you talked about the basic policy of 8 items, and then after 100 years, that should have been said, about the satisfaction to the people and answering the question from the International Committee or grasping the background. Well, that was a lofty talk to begin with, but I have to say sorry, we haven't been able to reach. We haven't been able to reach there. Understood. Thank you.
And Dr. Tanaka, please. Thank you. Thank you for the explanation. What I would like to ask is one point on the overall picture, and the second point is more of a detailed technical question. So I have listened to your 8, the major points of basic policy. Yes, I do believe that it is admirable that those are your policies. Now, I do understand that you have 3 teams under your investigation at the committee. I was especially interested on the activities of the accident causes investigation team. Now, your parent commission, the investigation committee itself, I hope you would not take offense of my saying so. I believe this is the key point of the makeup of the investigation committee. You have excluded intentionally experts on nuclear energy. On the other hand, the three teams, especially the accident causes investigation team, do have a very high level of expertise. So the concept may be different from, for instance, a sub-working group, but I would like to know about the relationship between these teams and the parent investigation committee in order to communicate the intent of the investigation committee. Is it that there are one or two members in the team and you have regular communication? That, I believe, is the normal form of the relationship. But as I understand it, in your accident causes investigation team, you do not have that kind of structure. Yes, we have intentionally done so, which means that they are totally separate from the investigation committee. Then, how do you communicate your position, your credo? Or in trying to draft the interim report, how did you communicate with the teams? Please explain. First of all, the constitution of the investigation committee, we have 10 committee members and 2 technical advisors, a total of 12. And as to the teams under the investigation committee, originally we were planning to have 4 teams, namely social system investigation team, accident causes investigation team, and damage expansion prevention measures investigation team, and another one, the 4th one, the team to verify the laws and regulations. But the last one have not been launched yet. So only 3 are working right now. And I have appointed the head of the teams for each of the team. And the teams will conduct the interviews and also make investigations. And the findings of the team will be reported to the investigation committee by the head of the team, including all the findings of the 3 teams. So what has been found and discovered through the investigation and interviews will be reported back to the 12 members of the investigation committee. And based upon such information, investigation committee can conduct our debate and discussion. Now, in the work process, when there are any questions from the investigation committee members, or in case where the members themselves would like to be involved in the discussion, the members would participate in the team process to be engaged in the discussion. And there were tremendous amount of interviews. And the findings of the interviews were also written into a report which would be understandable by those people who have not been directly engaged in the interviews. Now, in the actual process, the heads as well as the deputy heads of the teams have also participated in the discussion at the investigation committee, the parent committee. Now, although officially there has been only 6 meetings of the investigation committee, but actually there has been enormous number of the meetings and debates where the members have come together to have a discussion. There has been indeed a tremendous amount of such discussion being done. And there has been frequently visits to the site. For example, we have visited Onagawa and Haramachi, the power plants of Tohoku Electric Power. We have also visited Tokai Daini, the power plant, and we also thought that we should also visit Hamaoka, as well as Kashiwazaki Kariwa as well. And everyone together have visited these plants. And even on site, we have continued to have our debate. And from November to December, when we were drafting the interim report, the time has become so tight and severe in our allocation of a time for different work to do, we have still continued to have intensive debate into the content. And for instance, if the member of the committee writes certain statements, we would all of us read the statement and once again engaged in discussion. And if that would not be enough, each individual, when they send any part of the report to the secretariat would circulate to the other members. So by the next round of meeting, everyone would have read those written statements. And we have had very extensive discussion. So in any case, it is not that we will rubber stamp anything done by some individuals or several individuals. Everyone was involved in the process. And I believe we were able to have very in-depth discussion. And when I was the chair, I thought that all the 12 people may never be able to come to consensus. But I thought that this is fine. We would continue our discussion. And if we cannot come to consensus, perhaps minority views can also be presented. And then somebody said that Dr. Hatamura, because we have a debate, and since we have such a sincere and earnest debate, we needed to exhaust our discussion to try to enhance and elevate the quality of our discussion so that we would eventually, ultimately be able to come to consensus. So looking from the point of view of the other members of the investigation committee, the people who may feel it strange that their views may be reflected in the certain forms that they have never expected to be incorporated into the report. Now, for those facts which should be literally be written in a business-like manner, the direct findings of the investigation have been written in that way, listing the facts. But then we have also added observations and recommendations. For instance, Chapter 7. There has been division of the labor by the members, and the members themselves have written every word of that chapter. We have mutually checked, so we have exhausted and had thorough debate up until the end. There are some people who worry that there are no experts included in the investigation committee, but I'm not worried, because when we question whether we need such expertise on nuclear in a debate like ours, what we needed to make clear is something that was taken for granted may not have been actually something natural, or that you may have to adopt totally different perspective in order to try to make more visible what were perhaps neglected or underestimated. So to try to pursue a narrow sense of expertise would be meaningless. I thought that expertise in the sense to have much broader perspective, to try to learn what we need to properly learn, I thought would be more important. There are many phenomena on the nuclear which must also be accurately understood and correctly be grasped. So we have had experts in the different teams to be involved in the discussion at the parent investigation committee as well. Even though their names are not mentioned in the list of investigation committee members, whenever we needed an expertise, we have asked the experts in the team, the three teams, to be involved in the debate. And now I understood there were 2 or 3 points mentioned. Perhaps Mr. Ishibashi or Dr. Tonaka? Yes, in a related question, I did understand fully that you had exhaustive discussion. But were there any points you had a very heated debate where you had some confrontations and conflicts in trying to draft the interim report? It is not that we had several of them, but we were always had a heated debate. We were always in conflict with each other. Could you mention something specific where you found any conflicts? In the interim report, I do not remember that well, but what was most impressive is in Chapter 7, the last point, which mentions that 3 items were important. At the very end, we thought that it was missing. Something that was missing in that we found through the investigation that holistic view was something missing and lacking. And when we were trying to consolidate our view, we found that there was no description that the holistic view was lacking in the system to trying to deal with the nuclear accident. And at the very end of the chapter 7, we wanted to come up with a conclusion. And in order to have conclusion, it would be too presumptuous, just mentioning a couple of the points. So we have continued and continue to have the debate that the holistic view was quite lacking. Do you mean the severe accident response? It was not just the severe accident response, but in trying to investigate into the causes of the accident, were there any contested points, any points that you have argued a lot? In trying to understand the phenomenon, what was happened, I don't think there were no conflicts as to the detailed points. Now, what I would like to specifically know is that there is a view that there has been no major damage caused by the earthquake before the tsunami hit. Yes, as the consequence, we did not find any major destruction caused by the earthquake itself. So there was no major destruction from the earthquake, but there could be something which is still not known or hidden, something totally different. Everyone has focused too much on tsunami, and I thought that we need to try to clarify what has happened directly from the earthquake. We should try to separate that from tsunami, because we need to distinguish what has been caused by tsunami and what has been caused by the earthquake before the tsunami. We need to describe that, and we need to have that kind of understanding to separate the two. And that was my thinking. But from all sorts of different perspectives, we did not find any phenomenon which may have led us to think that there has been major destruction caused by the earthquake before the tsunami hit. So our conclusion was that there was no major destruction as caused by the earthquake itself. And that may have been in the background of the argument. But as a sequence of the thinking and scrutinizing what has happened, we should not premise ourselves that nothing has been destroyed by the earthquake. So we need to always try to separate the two and distinguish the two. And I thought before the investigation was conducted that perhaps there has been some destructions due to earthquake. But as a consequence of investigation, there were no major findings leading us to think that the major destruction was caused by the earthquake before the tsunami. But later, in the future, if we are able to get much closer to the reactor, there could be some different findings. And when we do have reconstruction experiment, we may have some different findings. Thank you very much. My name is Nomura. I'm the member of the NAIC. I'm the commissioner. And if I may dare to say this, it is something natural that the investigation committee members would do their best and be engaged in hard work and exhaust their deliberations. To look from the Japanese people, ordinary people's point of view, this is something taken for granted. Yes, sorry for emphasizing that. Now, if I may dare to say something presumptuous, but look from a different point of view, as to the regulatory the oversight authorities. If I may ask the question, as is written in the report, at the Nuclear Safety Commission as well as the NISA, already the government has gone through cabinet decision to create a new organization under Ministry of Environment, which may be called Nuclear Safety Agency, they have already gone ahead. In the interim report, apart from just one point mentioned in page 499, putting aside what may be the new organization to be created, there is no other mentions of what should be the organization. According to the schedule right now, even before the final report, the government may go ahead to design the new organization. And is it that the Government Investigation Committee has arrived at consensus that you would sort of endorse, you would accept what has been decided by the government? Is that your position? I believe that there is a certain level of speed as required and demanded by the public, and to try to move the safety regulatory oversight segment under the Ministry of Environment. This is not something that the Government Investigation Committee can endorse or to say something in advance, because such a decision is to be made in trying to, as accurately as possible, respond to the request and demand from the society. I believe it is a responsibility of the government to try to respond properly as quickly as possible to the demand coming from the public. Now, on the other hand, investigation committee, if we are asked to speed up in line with the government, the policy on the new organization, then we can do nothing at all, because we have our own speed and our own content that we need to elucidate. It is not that we can endorse or accept what is being decided by the government. That is not something that we should be interfere. That is, I believe, the understanding of the commissioners. Of course, those are important policy decisions, but on the other hand, we have our own life. Of course, we did have a debate ourselves that we may not be able to contribute to the discussion of creating the organization which may be going ahead of us. But if there are anything which could be useful and beneficial to such a policy making, we have agreed that we should put those factors into the interim report as much as possible. So for that particular point, we have mentioned something very concrete and specific, that these are the things to be included in the organizations and so forth. We did have such a debate.
Dr. Sakiyama, thank you. I have one question concerning speedy and monitoring the situation. Those was known, and it was not at all communicated to the citizens. Concerning the reasons, NISA, MEXT, the Ministry, and NSC, Nuclear Safety Commission, they didn't even have an idea of communicating such things to the people, and that was one of the findings. And I can, in a way, understand that. Now, concerning the system, sort of scratching a surface of the system by changing the system just a little, but by doing so, would it be actually possible to change the fundamental problem of not having this kind of an idea? I could ask for your personal view. Could you please share with us, even if it's just your personal view, because of the future, the importance? Concerning speed, you mentioned that those was known, but those was not known. Or actually monitoring the MEXT, the ministry knew about the monitoring. Concerning various pieces of data. Now, I am making the suggestion we should use the expression "in hindsight." In hindsight, these people had such use for the set of data, but it was not actually delivered to the other people so that they could be fully utilized. There are so many occasions where I want to say this. In hindsight, we could say these things, but the people at the time they didn't understand how their data was related to the overall picture. If it had been delivered to the certain people, it would have been extremely useful. But on that occasion, they didn't have a clue. If you ask me whether that's still okay, it's not good. Of course it's not. On that occasion, people who had data, people who were working there, if they could think what could they make a contribution for the overall benefits, perhaps many things could have been utilized. So I'm very disappointed. It's regretful, but if I keep saying regretful, it would be no good. So what's the point? Each individual person, how his or her work is related to the overall picture, that kind of an approach is necessary. If you are scratching the surface by changing just a little, no, that's not what you are trying to say. All the people involved should think how they can make a contribution to the demands of the society as a whole. We need to create a large number of such people. It's very important that everybody becomes such a person. Is that possible? Even if it's not possible, we still have to make efforts. Mr. Oshima, this is Oshima. Thank you for your explanation. I have just one question. It's related to the overall picture. The NAIC, belonging to the Diet, even we are legally constituted right to investigate, so we have a strong support. And in principle, this is made public. And in the case of the Dr. Hatamura's committee, you don't have that kind of a right to investigate. And in principle, the investigation was not made public. Because of such character of the government's investigation committee in the research and in validating the process, did you feel any restraint or limitations? If you had felt them, on what kind of problems did you feel those limitations? On a different note, as a chairman of the committee, Dr. Hatamura, if you are expecting us, NAIC, to really drill down into the detail of the investigation, what is your expectation? It's rather difficult for me to answer. Could I just really express how I really feel? I'm just wondering. It's not that without the investigation right we can't investigate, or somebody said lie, or somebody was hiding something. Did I have that kind of impression? No, not at all. Everybody was cooperating with us. That's how I feel. As I said at the outset, the committee was not pursuing responsibility, and that was understood by each person, and everybody cooperated with us. Having said that, suppose that we had given that the right to investigate, and how that the right is exercised, although I don't know about that. Out of the blue, I go somewhere, and concerning certain equipment, concerning this particular drawing of this particular design, submit this document, please. And people will say no or not. If I had the investigation right, could we actually do that? I have no idea. I've never done this, so I don't know. But along the line of thinking, even if you can't see things immediately, well, so for certain parts of the drawing, sometimes you want to say that please submit this particular drawing. And similarly, has there been any presentation at the society? If it has already been listed on the journal, we can search them. But regarding the minutes of the society, has there been memo? What were you doing on that occasion? What were you thinking at the time? There were many occasions that I wish I could ask those questions. Rather than saying that there were many such occasions, that's how I felt. I'm still talking about this, but anytime To whom that you want to ask what questions, just describe those things, and then we would be ready to cooperate. Some people say that, but because we can say those things, we have questions, and we say this and that. Now, it's almost nil that there are almost no occasions where we feel inconvenienced because we don't have the right to investigate. But if we had such the authority, then if this drawing is available in the computer, they submit that document, and if I could say those things, it might be great. Thank you. Now, from this people's perspective, for the first time in the constitutional history, we are given the legally constituted right to investigate and those things. I'm just wondering how people are thinking about them. And Dr. Hatamura's committee that's been commissioned by the government, from the citizens' perspective or from the international committee's perspective, looking at Japan, in the country of democracy, there is executive and there is a legislature. And the positioning of the investigation committee is what everybody is looking at, I think. And there is this government investigation committee, and there is the commission that's mandated by the Diet regarding the positions of these. I'm not just pointing out a particular committee, but what we are going to do with the people, with the working groups, and we would like to speak with the doctors and the members of the committee and the NAIC. And today we just listen to your comments as a result of the release of the 26th, the interim report. Thank you so much for being with us out of your schedule, and we would like to count on your cooperation. Yes, keep up with the good work. Thank you.
Now, coming into part 2 of the witness testimony from Tokyo Electric Power Company. On the 2nd of December, the interim report on verification and investigation as conducted by the company for the people involved in the accident. We here have Mr. Yamazaki, Executive Vice President and Representative Director, Mr. Ishida, the General Manager of Nuclear Quality Management Department, and Mr. Ono, General Manager, Nuclear Quality and Safety Management Department. We here have 40 minutes, including the question and answers. And since we have read the interim report, and we have also been given the PowerPoint the handouts, so if you could give us your comments as much as possible in 10 minutes, so that we will have the longer time for us to ask questions. All the commissioners have read the interim report, and we have read the other reports. And I believe other people's understanding has become clearer. So if you could please give us your cooperation and share with us your thoughts. Thank you. My name is Yamazaki from Tokyo Electric Power Company. As Dr. Kurokawa has mentioned, I have been asked to give explanation on the content of the interim report that was published in December last year. And before that, I would like to express our sincere apology for the fact that the radioactive substances that have been released to the outside in March of the last year, we have caused a major incident, and I would like to offer my apology to all the residents of Fukushima Prefecture, as well as to everyone for the troubles and worries that we have caused for the society at large. As for the accident response, we have been making all-out efforts with the cooperation given by the government, as well as the different institutions, manufacturers, and other companies in trying to contain the release of radioactive substances and try to have a stable cooling of the nuclear reactors at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, the so-called second step. We have been able to achieve that by December last year, and we would like to continue to endeavor to make all-out efforts for the medium to longer term challenges, including decommissioning. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of you for your kind support and cooperation. And I hope that all the people who have been evacuated can go home as quickly as possible. We would like to make our endeavors so that we will be able to offer a sense of security for the society at large. Let us be seated to speak. Actually, I thought that we were given 25 minutes for the explanation, and we have prepared for that. But since 10 minutes is the time allocated, perhaps we could give you some abbreviated version. Let me, first of all, ask you to look at the handouts which has been distributed to you. As for the system of investigation, perhaps these are something that you need to keep in mind. So let me explain on that. As to the system of investigation mentioned on first page, we need to have a strict as well as thorough accident investigation and verification, and illuminate what have been the causes and try to learn lessons so that lessons can be reflected into the management of our business going forward, which is, I believe, social responsibility for the party which have generated this accident. In June last year, thus for this purpose, we have established investigation committee inside the company, and we have also asked the outside experts to be participants of the verification committee, which was also established to hear the experts' view and third parties' view to be reflected into our investigation so that objectivity could be maintained. On page 2, on the process of our consideration, we have conducted interviews as well as confirmed on the documents and records. We have collected data, made analysis, and we have had visual inspection on the equipments, and we have put into our report. The deliberation as well as verification has been done through the investigation committee. We have also asked the third parties and experts' view through the verification the committee the meetings, and we have made public by making clear the interim report, which included the possible cause as well as the measures to prevent the recurrence of the accident. Now, as to the purpose of this report, on page 3, as you can see, based upon the findings of analysis, as well as the facts that's been discovered through the investigation, we would like to bring into light the cause of the accident so that we can contribute further to the improvement of the safety of the existing nuclear power plants and to make a proposal for the necessary measures to be undertaken in order to prevent any reactor core damages. In the report, we have investigated a series of events, and we have focused on the certain points, and we have also attached annex, and we have also published this annex document as well. If you could please refer to page 9, which is in the summary, the point 9, please. In the outline of the accident, As you can see, in 1446, earthquake occurred, and all of the nuclear reactors in operation have automatically shut down. At Fukushima Daiichi, the external power source have been lost, but emergency diesel generator have been invoked, and the necessary power supply was secured. And at Fukushima Daini, the external power source have been maintained, so power supply was secured. But then, because of the tsunami, emergency diesel generator as well as electricity switchboard have been flooded or covered with water. So, in addition, from the units 1 to 5, all of the AC power source have been lost, and for units 1, 2, and 4, DC power supply have been lost. So the one after another, the core cooling function have been stopped, and we have tried alternative measures of water injection, but the core, even so, would have been damaged. And then afterwards, the hydrogen, the explosion, and other chain reaction have expanded, which has led to a tremendous disaster for nuclear. That is our understanding. The Fukushima Daiichi's unit the 6, where the emergency diesel motor have continued to operate, and also unit 5, which was adjacent to unit 6, have also been able to have the power supply from the unit 6. The external power source have been maintained after tsunami, so it was not that major a damage. And for Fukushima Dainichi units 1 to 4, we have had accident management response, and a cold shutdown was achieved. So that is the outline of what has happened through this accident. If you could please refer to page 12. On page 12, you can see the magnitude of the earthquake as hit the nuclear power plant. Just for your information, there is assessed the standard seismic vibration is being set in order to assess the seismic safety for the nuclear power plant. For Fukushima Daiichi, there were the segments where the maximum response acceleration was exceeded against the standard seismic vibration. But all in all, in most part, it was below the maximum response acceleration. So it was on par to the level of standard seismic vibration in most part. If you could jump to page 21, which gives the estimated level of tsunami and assessment thereof. For the assessment of estimated the tsunami from the 1960s, right from the beginning of the approval given for siting of Fukushima Daiichi, and up until just before the earthquake, the process of response by the TEPCO is described. We have started with the Chile, the earthquake, the tsunami, the level, which was the precondition for the design of the power plant, the construction. And also in 1992, with the civil engineering academic society has come up with the tsunami assessment technology, and we have conducted the necessary measures in view of the tsunami, the water, the levels. And we have also based ourselves upon the position of the seismic survey research promotion headquarters, as well as Dr. Satake's proposed Jogan tsunami possibilities. For these new findings and theories, we have taken into consideration and asked the Civil Engineering Society to deliberate on this, and also conducted the survey on the sediments. We have also, on a voluntary basis, made investigation and research. As for response for tsunami, there has been some the statement that we have envisaged a tsunami with more than 10 meters, but as page 22 says, we have utilized the certain models. Now, there was no accepted the model on the red areas for the frontal sea area for Fukushima Prefecture. In the tsunami assessment technology has been established as a standard for the nuclear power plant. And we have had the trial calculation for the wave source the model in order to make the assessments. And we have asked the Civil Engineering Society to make deliberation on that. But such the trial calculation did not have any scientific grounds. But we had worked trying to do this calculation, but it did not really represent any height of the tsunami. Let us now go into accident management.
Okay, page 24, please. This is about what the nuclear power plant should be. In installing nuclear reactors based on law, the licensing procedure is designated, stipulated. It's subject to the approval, licensed by the METI minister. And METI and NSA conduct double checking, and based on the safety guideline and other guidelines stipulated by the NSC, the compliance is checked. After the operation is started, the regular inspection must be conducted. The security check has been confirmed. Page 25, regarding the design of the nuclear power plant, people make the error and the machine might actually fail. Based on that assumption, multi-layered, diverse, independent emergency cooling system has been installed. Also concerning the important functions such as reactor scrum, should there be a failure, make sure that on the safety side there will be operation. Based on that kind of design ideas, it has been designed. That's what we have done. Thank you. Thank you very much for being with us out of a very busy schedule. I have two questions. First, Dr. HATAMURA, the chairman of that government investigation committee, looked at these issues on multiple areas. The TEPCO had some problems in terms of the operation. And then what is your view on that? And second, although this is not something that I directly heard, according to some sources, the radioactivity spread in this unfortunate disaster. According to someone of TEPCO, the radioactivity is considered bona vacantia, just like golf course. So it's not their concern. Now, Mr. Yamazaki, you are the senior vice president. Just your personal opinion, can you really think in that way, that it's bona vacantia? The government, the investigation committee conducted various investigations. We looked at them. They were shown to us. And we have been cooperating extensively to the government's investigation committee. Regarding their findings, I think they are based on very meticulous investigations. On our part, concerning the findings, we take them very heavily. Another thing, in terms of the understanding facts, I don't really think that there is a significant difference between their views and our views. But as was mentioned by the chairman, in some cases there were some differences. And I see the operation of the Unit 1 that has been discussed often. Concerning on the part of TEPCO, perhaps our recognition wasn't good enough. Perhaps there was a lack of education. And Unit 3, the HPCI, was a response good enough, and taking into consideration the subsequent measures. That was one of the findings. On those things, we intend to continue our investigation, and we would like to find out what the facts are. And that's number one. Number two, about the bona vacantia. Probably that's probably a view of the legal counselor, legal counsel or the lawyer. I personally don't know so much about this, and I cannot be very precise in my answer. But I hope that you will excuse me for not being able to address this. When there's such a report, as the senior vice president, that's really not what you meant to express. There are questions from the NAIIC members. Mr. Ishibashi, I'm Ishibashi from the NAIC. Could I ask you several questions? Yes, I have 2 or 3 questions. First off, excuse me, I was not able to follow you accurately concerning the evaluation of tsunami. I think in the last analysis, I think you were saying that scientifically it was not scientifically justified. Right in front of Fukushima, the source of wave was placed about the evaluation of high tsunami. Was that what you're referring to? As a justification, our understanding was not that there could be the earthquake from there. I hope I'm not really nitpicking on what you have said, but if you say scientifically it was not justified, I think that's very bad. You are insulting science. It's really about what science is. Dr. Koichi Tanaka is far more qualified than I am concerning this matter, but I don't think that it was scientifically unjustified. I don't think so. Speaking of science, with a set of values, science is independent from a set of values. That's the really discussion of what science is. And I don't want to delve into that kind of detailed discussion. But having said that, I think it was scientifically it was justified. However, when it comes to how to use that, depending on the policy of how to use it, it can be eliminated or it cannot. It's not eliminated, and I think that's the kind of relation we are talking about. If you just say scientifically it's not justified, I think there are, other than myself, there will be people, the scholars, in earthquake and tsunami, who would be infuriated. So on behalf of them, I just wanted to say this. About the seismic movement, I have a question. You conducted an analysis, this seismic response analysis, for instance, including Fukushima Daiichi and Daini. At each unit, on the basic board of the nuclear reactor, the seismic wave was observed, and using that, I think you conducted a response analysis. But in case of Fukushima Daiichi, setting aside just a little bit of Unit 6, there was interruption in the record of observation concerning the basic board because of the inappropriateness of the software concerning data collection. But the tremor lasted much, much longer. So my question, concerning unit number 1, the maximum acceleration was 400 something, 447, around 447 to the east and west. And that was the peak, and a little later, and then there was interruption. And afterwards, there was no strong tremor, and perhaps after that, there might have been a wave stronger than 447. Haven't you thought about that at all? Concerning the materials submitted here, they are written based on the actual observation records. What you are referring to, Doctor, are you talking about the after the earthquake? Which point are you referring to? Well, without inappropriateness or without failure in the observation system, the record should have been much longer. Perhaps there might have been a longer duration, or it might have been greater in terms of the acceleration. So there was interruption in the record, and if you conduct the seismic response analysis with interrupted data, that's inappropriate. That's not sufficient. You thought about that? Could we ask our engineer to respond to that? Please, please do so. One of the witnesses, the owner, will address the question. As you rightly said, in the given circumstances concerning the data, the obtained data, the recorded data, have certain limitations. I understand that. And regarding the gist of your question, with the earthquake, was there a significant damage on the facilities? That was not the very first question, but I think it's related to that. With that earthquake, concerning the important facilities in terms of safety, we don't think that they suffered significant damages because of the earthquake, partly because of the perspective from the response analysis. And between the earthquake and the tsunami arrival, we had quite detailed planned operation data, so our judgment was based on that. Actually, it's not that wide in this. My question is not really that wide in scope. Just there was the response analysis, very specific the issue. The earthquake had much longer duration in terms of vibration, but your observation record was interrupted and you conducted the response analysis, but do you think that was enough? I should really listen to your answer, but although it's not going to be that better, and it still will have some issue. But for instance, using stripping wave, tri-ground building coupled vibration, that would be one way to make up for the interruption in the record. There are perhaps other means. Haven't you thought about all the other means to address this problem? Concerning this case, there was the actually obtained operation data. At the field, do as much checking as possible. Based on that, the interim report was compiled. Concerning the even more special method to replicate the phenomena, the stress evaluation based on the wave source that was obtained, that's what we used. In other words, this is the interim result, right? Now, the stripping wave analysis based on stripping wave can be very important. For instance, 2007, July 16th, there was a Niigata Prefecture Chuetsu, the earthquake. At Kashiwazaki Karia, TEPCO conducted this with your own accord. But what about this time? December 9th, then there was the hearing concerning the earthquake and tsunami. NISA, I think, presented the results of analysis. But TEPCO, as TEPCO, haven't you done the exercise? On December 9th, the stripping wave was made public just 7 days before that, in the sensitive timing, and just a little bit before the presentation of the valuable results of the stripping wave as of the 2nd of December, the interim report was made to me. It was a bit too early. Regarding the way you address the seismic tremor, seismic movement, perhaps you are underestimating the seismic movement. That's the impression I had. Could you address that issue? You mentioned that perhaps we were a little too early to present the interim report results. On our part, we took into consideration various other things and decided to present the report on the 2nd of December. So that was not the only thing that we had in our mind. Concerning what you are finding, the way we look at the earthquake, of course, we would like to study them even further. That was the interim report we submitted. By June, as a target, we would like to compile the final report concerning where it's still more wanting. We would like to study even further. Thank you. If time allows, I would like to come back to this later. Mr. Tanaka, please. I'm Tanaka, member of the NAIIC. In relation to what was just discussed, I would like to ask you a question. The operation parameters. I think what you were saying that if there had been some defects or the damages in the piping, then the parameters would be different. I think that's what you're saying. But you didn't conduct analysis with a hole in the piping. We actually asked Janus to do that. On a certain occasion, we asked Janus to do this analysis with a hole in the piping. about the accident. At the accident hearing, it was reported concerning the whole area. It's 0.3 square centimeters, very small in terms of the actual size. It's more like it's a hair crack issue. Has there been an issue of hair crack or not? If it has been, even if it had been there, there would be no significant difference between the parameters that were observed. That was already approved by the NAIIC. So what I'm concerned is this: for instance, the guillotine rupture, or whether there was a response to the leakage detector. I'm not talking about the mid-scale LOCA. I'm more talking about the hairline crack. Those hairline cracks could occur in power plants, and I'm talking about whether there were such hairline cracks at the power plant. What would be the actual flow rate if there is a hairline crack? And we know from Jana's computation, even if it's just 0.3 square centimeters, even the total orifice is so small, per hour, the flow rate is 7.2 tons. So after 10 hours, the reactor would be totally empty. Such defect or failure, perhaps there might have been such failures in the piping. That's my concern, but you didn't even consider that. On page 36, concerning the IC, the containment vessel was visually inspected, but in the piping there were no damages. If not, things can be done by the visual inspection, UT, CT, PT, according to the maintenance standard. Usually detection is conducted to explore possible hairline cracks. That would be all unnecessary. Concerning the visual inspection, what was the level, and what about the heat insulators? And I'm not just focusing on IC. It doesn't have to be IC. What's happening within the containment vessel at the reactor? It's really about imagination. But TEPCO, in a black and white manner, at the earthquake, there was nothing that happened after the earthquake. It's almost impossible. Could you please share with us your view? In the interim report of the investigation, as was mentioned by you, the parameters, and earthquake response analysis and visual inspection, we said that the earthquake didn't result in major damages. But as you said, perhaps from the technical perspective, we should really delve into details. I think we need to study them further. But concerning this, I'd like to ask one of the engineers to share his view.
What you have just said, 4.3 square centimeters or so of some kind of crack, a hair crack, and 7.2 tons in just 1 hour were the points being made. For instance, I believe what you're referring to is that there have been no fluctuations in the pressures on the nuclear reactor. Whether a hair crack that may lead to fluctuations in the pressure of the nuclear reactor, if it is small, it may be true, as you say. But in the PCV, in the similar condition, 7.2 tons, 70 tons of leakage in 10 hours, then it could be made possible through the operation data. Now, let me try to give you a brief answer. The pressure to be constant with 7.2 tons of leakage, that could never, ever be the case. The pressure will be reduced. We do find in thermal power plants, when we remove the pipings, we often find that openings would become bigger. It starts from very small openings, but as the pressure gushes out and spurts out, the opening would become wider. So even though the pressure has been reduced, flow rate does not change. To be more precise, there could be all sorts of different circumstances. But what I have tried to say is that in the inside of the PCV, until the tsunami had hit, the data on the pressure is recorded. And for instance, the main steam, the pipings, the flow rate, the data is available. So from the PCV, if there is a major cracks, or if there is something of a wider crack starting from hair cracks, I'm sure it would have been already been visible. Now, in Unit 1, that at the early stage, the reactor had been damaged, and that is the big problem. With the emergency condenser, the function had been lost because of the tsunami, which was found in the later investigation. And I don't think there was a major contradiction in this, in the overall, the process. And that is what we have been explaining to you. Of course, as you say, we need to make the further detailed survey. Is it all right? Are you satisfied with the answer? Yes, my name is Nomura. I'm the commissioner. We have asked you some technical points of view, but now I would like to turn to more of a general point, which is the point of interest of the Japanese people. Generally speaking, the TEPCO, in establishing nuclear power plant and in operation of the plant, I'm sure you have always made the explanation that the nuclear power plants are safe to the community as well as the municipalities. In comparison to such statements, what were the position inside the company, the employees inside the company, were you also thought that it was quite safe? Or was it the case that even though you have not disclosed to the outside, you did think that there were certain risks and dangers, and you have done some system design in response to that? Or was there any atmosphere inside the company to make it taboo to say that nuclear power plants are not safe? Now, inside the company, there has been never the case where that employees have thought that nuclear power plants were very dangerous, but we have tried to reassure the people that it was safe. That was not the kind of awareness we had. For the nuclear power plants, from scientific point of view, there are possible different disaster risks. And in making the investigation of the accident, we have made an utmost effort to try to clarify and verify on that. And that we have stated to the people in the community that the nuclear energy was quite safe is because we had have thought ourselves that it was quite safe. It is not that inside the company there were other calculations leading to something otherwise. That is not the case. Yes, I'm the commissioner. My name is Oshima. In relation to the question raised by Commissioner Nomura, what has been clearly mentioned in Dr. Hatamura's report, the point that the severe accident response measures were inadequate, especially response to natural disasters. And amongst the natural disasters, especially the response to tsunami was extremely inadequate, is emphasized in the report. Now, why did it happen like this? Why was it the case? This may not be just responsibility of the Tokyo Electric Power Company, but also the responsibility of the regulatory authority of the government, as well as the Nuclear Safety Commission, as well as NISA and others. These should also be investigated. But as far as TEPCO is concerned, for the safety measures, especially for severe accident, and in particular for earthquake and tsunami, to give you a conclusion, as a consequential conclusion, perhaps that you were too easy on this, you were too lax on this, or that there were some major blind spot, that you had a tunnel vision, so to speak. For Japan, we needed to absolutely make sure to ensure safety for nuclear power, because we have experienced Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and we have also seen the Chernobyl accident in the past. And secondly, Japan is ridden with many different natural disasters, tsunami and earthquake. About 10% of all the earthquake in the world is said to happen in Japan. Against that backdrop, I must say that you cannot deny that there was a grave oversight something very lax in the response procedure. And Dr. Hatamura's report is exactly pointing to that the problem. As for the tsunami, you didn't necessarily had to go back to the Jogan tsunami. Even, for instance, several years ago, when there was Indian Ocean tsunami, we have seen the very tragic the scenes through the television. And you may have supposed that that would never ever happen in Japan. So my question is, looked from the cost and measures to be undertaken, it would be very expensive, that it could have to be passed on to the electricity tariffs. So perhaps cost factor, was it a important the point? You were aware of the possibility, and you may have done some consideration, but because of the cost factor, you were not able to take the measures. Was that a case? Or was it the case that you lacked imagination? Was there any constraints in the management inside the company? Or was there any misalignment with the communication with NISA and the authorities? I would like to hear your views. Now, you have mentioned about tsunami and also severe accident management. For the accident management, we have written into our report. Ever since the Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island incidents, in Japan as well, there were the policies and moves that we need to develop and prepare for such severe accident and so forth. And there were instructions from the government and much advice coming from the government, and we were having confirmation and communication from time to time to develop the necessary measures. But those measures were totally useless in this accident. As Ambassador Oshima has mentioned, why did this happen? Because something we have supposed as an assumption had been totally overturned because of the disaster this time. Why did this happen? You may have insinuated that the TEPCO, because of the cost factor, there may have been lax in our response. That is not true at all. In the process of investigating into the accident, we have found that there were many cases where the new findings and new knowledge has been incorporated from time to time in preparing for the natural disasters, and we have been actively involved in developing the measures. But what was lacking, what was missing, that would be elucidated from now onwards through the investigations by the different committees. But as a licensee, we have been faithfully trying to follow any measures as instructed by the government. So as the person involved in the accident investigation, this is the conclusion that we have reached. Now, about the technical point, please. Now, this is some follow-up question. In actuality, TEPCO, in a wider sense, you have already gone through a similar experience. Back in 2007, in July 16th, there was an earthquake for Kashiwazaki Kariwa already. You have underestimated the seabed active fault, what is called the negiri, or you have continued to have intentional underestimation. And you have underestimated the seabed active faults, and you were not able to have an accurate estimation of the earthquake. And the seismic, the vibration have been exceeding significantly above your expectation. You have gone through such a difficult experience already. So perhaps the underestimation of the active fault this time have been changed into just tsunami in the case of Fukushima. So the root cause is exactly the same. But such a reflection is not even mentioned in your interim report. Your experience of Kashiwazaki Kari as the case. Of course, in a narrow sense, you have technological experience, for instance, that you have established the seismic buildings as well as the network for observing the earthquake and so forth. But that is not the point I'm trying to make. Much more in a wider sense, as Ambassador Oshima has mentioned, the lack of imagination, let's just say, to be modest and humble before the natural disaster phenomena, before nature. You need to be humble to try to respond to any possible disaster that may come. You were not able to utilize your experience at Kashiwazaki Kariwa. So how would you respond? Now, looking at the results of our accident investigation, we have been trying to respond as we have been explaining to you. But as you have just pointed out, perhaps we could have advanced further our preparedness against the earthquake, and that is not mentioned in depth in the interim report. That may be true. So perhaps we need to think through on this and try to look into this going forward. Yes, lastly, please. Yes, my name is Hachiska. What I would like to ask is, what is the present circumstance of Unit 4 right now? Can you give us the technical information on Unit 4, please? For Unit 4, no fuels were loaded into the nuclear reactor, but the fuels were inside the pool. For the circumstance of the pool, we see a stable cooling situation. As we have written in our report, when we conduct monitoring in many ways, the nuclear reactor fuel, there may be no major damage. But as for the details, I would like to ask the engineer to respond.
Concerning the pool, please refer to page 49, 49 and 50. Concerning the Unit 4, your concern is that there was no fuel in the reactor, but still there was a hydrogen explosion. Why? Concerning the fuel in the pool, isn't there a major scale damage that occurring to the fuel? I think that's your concern. Now, the Unit 4 is accessible in the controlled area of the Unit 4, that's less contaminated area, so it was accessible from an earlier stage. And it's at the moment, the stable cooled down situation is ensured. Regarding a major damage to the fuel, as long as it's dipped in the pool, within the water, it is all right. But if it's out of water, then overheating occurs, and then there will be major damages. At the time of the hydrogen explosion, there was no cool down within the pool, so because of the evaporation. There should be the lowering of the water level, but on the following day, from a helicopter from up above, we were still able to see the water level. So from that perspective, we don't think that it was because of the exposure of the fuel and there was the hydrogen, and then that led to explosion. After water injection, looking at the water level within the pool, within the Unit 4, in the pool, the fuel was not exposed. Why was there an explosion? We looked into that. There is a device called the SGTS. Perhaps drifting hydrogen from Unit 3 caused explosion, according to our understanding. Within at the Unit 4, at what part of the building, where did the explosion happen? The pool is on the 5th floor. The floor on the 5th floor was damaged, and if we went to the 4th floor, the ceiling of the 4th was blown up from bottom to upwards, and the floor of the 4th floor was pushed downwards, very damaged. There must have been a strong impact from the explosion. Because of the piping for the air conditioning, there was a SGTS line. Probably there was a drifting from there. If there is the hydrogen that's generated in the pool, then it's generated on the 5th floor, and because the hydrogen is light, it goes up to the ceiling. It's very difficult to think that the explosion occurred at the 4th floor. I think it is because of the drifting hydrogen. I understand. So it's now in the stable condition. Yes. Right, without doubt. Thank you. Just one question, be brief, in relation to this, but it's also related to Mr. Ishibashi's question. At Kashiwazaki, I have forgotten which unit it was, at the time, at the sloshing of the fuel exchange pool, and there was the release of radioactive materials. Based on the experience concerning Unit 1 at Fukushima, you had measures concerning sloshing, right? You did have measures. Yes or no, please. Measures again concerning sloshing at each unit. Yes, there were measures in place. So after this earthquake, it was about the same level as the SS, so there was no spill or spillover, right? Concerning measures against sloshing, it's very difficult to make sure that there will be no spillage. Our measures were not to that extent, so there must have been some spillage. So there was spillage, yes. At each unit, there was a major vibration. The water in the pool was leaked to outside of the pool. Did you do the analysis? Rather than the analysis, we just think that that's likely to have happened. So the measures were not really adequate. Lastly, Mr. Yokoyama, just one word or two words. Page 25, please. Second line from the top. Multi-layered, diverse, and independent emergency cooling systems were installed, but look what happened. Of the 13 emergency baths, only one remained, and it was installed in a different place. So you mentioned the multi-layered, diverse, but what actually were you referring to? Multi-layered and diverse. That's my first question. If the dike had been raised, and concerning the cost for that, the concrete used for the raised dike, of the entire project cost, what percentage would that be? So when we are talking about raising the dike higher or not, what kind of cost are we talking about? And not just limiting to this. Since the Fukushima Daiichi is quite old, and after it was built, there was a lot of the progress in terms of technologies from various experience. The modification, improvement, did you do all the necessary improvement work so far? 3 questions. Regarding the first question, multi-layeredness. Page 57, please. You can see a chart. In the final analysis, various functions that had been in place because of the tsunami, the functions were lost. That's the fact based on our investigation. These were prepared, but because of this, all the parcels, including AC, DC, they were lost. Even the heat removal function for emergency was lost. And you made this from the perspective of multi-layeredness and diverseness. Yes, for multi-layeredness, we installed them. Secondly, about the cost issue. To making the dike higher, what is the cost involved? Could I come back to this question later? I would like to know the breakdown of the cost, overall cost breakdown. Understood, certainly. And what was the third? After Fukushima Daiichi was built for several decades, new findings were made, there were the improvements made. And not just limited to Fukushima Daiichi, but in all the relevant places, did you do the upgrading work? In principle, to that end, we made efforts to that end, and that's what we did in our work. So you made efforts. It's not really necessary. According to the building standard law, unqualified and qualified is pretty distinct. So there is a strong checking. Didn't you do that kind of checking? For instance, when there is a change in the guideline, if there is a kind of a new evolution, there is a regular safety review. That's the system stipulated in the national deregulation. The checking in terms of the capacity, can we actually do that? Or if there is a change in the guideline, we do back-checking. Those activities have been conducted. So from that perspective, yes, the checking has been conducted, and we did respond to them. Because of the time restraint, of course, we visited the president of the TEPCO so that we could get cooperation. So from the citizens' perspective, what is the difference between the government's investigation committee and the NAIC? We would like to make sure that there would be more the broad understanding, and electric power company is one of the major key players. We definitely would like to have major cooperation, and the overall cooperation is the promised, and there will be many the working groups, so we would like to count on your cooperation. Thank you so much for being with us out of your very busy schedule.
Thank you for waiting, ladies and gentlemen. So coming into part 3 of the witness testimonies from the MEXT, Ministry of Education, Science and Technology, there is the interim summary report that has been issued by the MEXT for the recovery and reconstruction from the Great East Japan earthquake. We have read your report, and thank you very much for compiling this report. There is a time constraint, so we would like to have the witness at a hearing for 30 minutes or so, and sorry for being late for about 10 minutes. Now, it's been more than 10 months since this major disaster. Compared to the initial stage, there are a lot of information coming through media report as well as from the various investigative committees. And next, at the very initial stage, you must have played multiple of the roles. I can really sympathize with the great difficulty that you have gone through. The education schools as well. During the March, it is the graduation and the commencement period. I do understand that the hardship that you have gone through, which are also written into the interim report. What we would like to focus on, for instance, speedy and so forth. If you could share with us your position, your certs, Mr. Watanabe and Mr. Akeno and Mr. Kanda. If somebody could explain to us about 10 minutes, and then we would like to ask you the questions on the major points that we would like to know. Since all the members of our commission have read the interim report and we have collected relevant information, so please proceed with that understanding. Thank you. Then immediately, I would like to explain on the MEXT's efforts. It's been more than 6 months since the Great East Japan earthquake. We have been making all sorts of different efforts for recovery and reconstruction, and we have sorted out the challenges as well as the lessons learned. And under Parliamentary Vice Minister Ki, we have established the verification team, and we have conducted an interim investigation. And on the 22nd of December, the first preliminary report has been published. As for the response for the nuclear disaster, the speedy and monitoring, there is a government investigation committee making investigation, and we would like to take note of the findings that are there and try to deepen our discussion going forward. And if you could give us understanding on that premise, including the content of the interim report and also monitoring and speedy, I would like to ask Mr. Watanabe, the Senior Deputy Director General in charge of this, to explain. Thank you. My name is Watanabe. I'm the Senior Deputy Director General of Science and Technology Policy Bureau of the MEXT. Today, I would like to explain to you very briefly on the response for emergency monitoring as well as response with speedy from the MEXT. As of 16th of January, as of today, we have already distributed to you the handout material for NAIC. So based upon this handout, let me very briefly give you the explanation. If you would turn over the cover page, you can see the table of contents. So turning to page 1, which is response for the emergency monitoring, as the prerequisite, I hope that commissioners, you have the handout with you, I hope. Is it all right for me to proceed? It's about 10 pages or so brochure. If you would turn to 3 pages, there is page 1. This is our response for emergency monitoring. What kind of response did we envisage in the disaster preparedness basic plan? What were written into the plan is being delineated here. First of all, the first point says that under the central government support, the local governments are to conduct monitoring. The second point, the MEXT is a designated the public organization in accordance with the law for the disaster prevention. It is more specifically the JAEA and NIRS, the Japan Atomic Energy Agency and National Institute of Radiological Sciences, as stipulated by the law. Now, for these the designated the local institutions, when they're now, thirdly, these are the ones to maintain and develop the necessary operators and equipments. The local governments, whenever they're notified from the licensees, are to strengthen the monitoring the process and compile the results and to report to NISA. Because this is the case of commercial reactors, to the regulatory agency, which is the NISA, and also to inform the MEXT as well. And now, in the case of the second point, which is the NISA, when they are communicated from the licensee on the monitoring results, they are to inform the relevant institutions. In the case of emergency, it will be the headquarters on the site who will compile the information and to inform the local governments as well as the nuclear disaster headquarters in Tokyo and try to collect all the necessary monitoring information. Now, at the very the bottom, you see the role to be played by the MEXT. MEXT, as the designated public institution, will mobilize the operators as well as the equipment to try to support the monitoring activity by the local governments. If you would please turn to page 2, what was actually done by MEXT, which was the 1446 of the March 11th, when the earthquake occurred. The TEPCO has made Article 10 notification on 1542. The emergency was communicated from TEPCO. And 1 hour from that, on 1645, the Nuclear Disaster Response Support Headquarters was established under the MEXT. But because, as stipulated by the law, the role to be played by MEXT is to support on the monitoring and such. So we have established the headquarters for that purpose. Now, at that juncture, we did not know what would happen to Fukushima's nuclear power plants. But in order to prepare for something in the emergency, the MEXT have, from the normal times, have asked the 47 prefectural the governments to conduct the environmental radiation the survey, which is called the radiation, the environmental radiation level of the survey. There are monitoring posts in 47 prefectures, and it is normally done just once a year, the information to be provided. And it is usually about once a month the measurement is taken. But because we thought that emergency could happen, we have asked the prefectural governments to take the data once every hour. That was the evening of 12th. Also not written into the report, but on the 11th, since the headquarters was established on site, 2 MEXT staff was sent to the site via the Self-Defense Force helicopter. On the same helicopter, the METI Senior Vice Minister was on board as well. On the 12th, we have asked the prefectural governments to have hourly measurement taken through the monitoring post, but the monitoring posts were destroyed in the affected areas. And we thought that we may have to prepare monitoring vehicles. So at 10:20 in the evening, we have requested JAEA to send monitoring the car to the site. On the 13th, the monitoring the vehicle actually arrived on the site. The Fukushima prefectural government or the central government, they have utilized the staff that we have already sent and have conducted the monitoring based upon the monitoring the plan as agreed by the headquarters on site. But the situation seems to become even more serious. So on the 15th of March, in the morning, there was hydrogen explosion in Unit 4. So the data levels coming through the monitoring post was quite high. And actually, the wind was blowing from the north to south. And also, the data from the monitoring post in Ibaraki Prefecture was also made available from the 15th of March. Since the data levels have actually been elevated, we have decided to make announcements from the data taken from the monitoring post on hourly the measurements, making requests to the prefectural governments. On the other hand, on the local on-site the headquarters, which is about 5 kilometers from the power plant, at the off-site center was established. The nuclear reactor was in a very serious condition. On the 15th of March, the off-site, the national government's on-site the headquarters was moved from the off-site center to Fukushima prefectural government office. And under such circumstances, monitoring was not done in a sufficient manner. MEXT have sent out the monitoring vehicle, which has arrived in the evening on the Fukushima city. And we have given the instruction, and from 8:40 to 8:50 on the evening of 15th, at the 20 kilometers radius to the northwest from the reactor, on 3 locations, the monitoring were conducted. And on an hourly basis, at the maximum, 330 microsievert, very high the level that was observed. And as for this result, on the next day, on 1:05, on the 16th, we made the press announcements and provided information. As I have mentioned, monitoring was supposed to be done by the on-site headquarters, but it was not done in a sufficient manner. So in the morning of the 16th of March, with the instruction given by Mr. Edano, the then Chief Cabinet Secretary, for the monitoring data outside of the 20 kilometers radius from the nuclear reactor should be done by the MEXT. And the assessment of the monitored data will be done by the Nuclear Safety Commission. And then, based upon the assessment of the Nuclear Safety Commission, the response will be decided by the governments, the nuclear disaster headquarters. So that was a division of work. Sorry, if you could speed up. Yes, we have conducted the monitoring by air and on the sea as well. And page 3, there is a mention of the point also alluded to by the government investigation, the committee's the discussion, that the monitoring because of the earthquake and tsunami may not have been conducted, and that that was problematic. For this particular point, if I may make a comment, before the 15th of March, we were able to just partially make public because the on-site headquarters was not functioning. But ever since the evening of 15th of March, the MEXT will be immediately be making public basically for these measurements, and that has been actually done until now. On page 4, which is the speedy question, what was the original position based upon ERSS? The release, the source information is provided, and the prediction is to be made. But that could not be done because there was no information on the release source coming. Even without such information, we have set the level of the unit amount. Unit amount is the release of 1 becquerel. And based upon that unit amount, we were supposed to make the calculation. On page 5, what was actually done by MEXT? On the 1640 of the 11th of March, we have shifted over to the emergency mode to assume that the unit release amount would be 1 becquerel per hour. That was the premise in making the calculation and send it to each individual terminal. The offsite center Fukushima, the dedicated lines to the offsite center, as well as dedication line to the Fukushima government office, because of the earthquake, has broken down. We were not able to send the information to those terminals, so we had to use facsimile as well as email. As I mentioned earlier, the METI did not provide the ERSS, the release source information, so we were not able to do the forecast calculation based upon speedy. And on the 11th and 12th, that was the situation. That is the reason why we had to come up with concentric the demarcation and zoning for the evacuation zones. As I have mentioned, the MEXT, the NISA, as well as nuclear safety commissions, had conducted speedy calculation based upon the hypothesis assumptions. The data were not being published. We did not think that we needed to publish, but this was problematic, as is being pointed to by the different parties. On the 15th of March, as I mentioned earlier, there was indeed significant release, and we have started to publish the monitoring data of each prefecture. And at that time, the MEXT have explained this to the ministers and the vice ministers of our ministry. But there was no specific decision as to whether we should publish the data or not. In the morning of 16th of March, Chief Cabinet Secretary Mr. Edano has instructed on the division of the work, but he did not give us any instruction on how to treat the speedy. On the other hand, with the instruction given from Mr. Edano, the minister and vice ministers of the MEXT have had a discussion. And since the assessment of monitoring is not to be done by the MEXT, it should be the Nuclear Safety Commission who should also operate and manage the speedy, which was agreed by all the participants. And based upon that, those two operators to have the speedy operation were transferred to the Secretariat of Nuclear Safety Commission. And after that, at Nuclear Safety Commission, because they were not yet able to get the release source information, they had to make reverse calculation based upon the monitored data of the environment. On the 23rd, they have announced the result of this estimation. And on the 11th of April and 25th and 27th, the public announcements have been made. As for the unit release data and also the data based upon several hypotheses, that were published on the 26th of April for the unit release data, and on May the 3rd, the other hypothetical data. On page 6, there is the problem as cited by the government's investigation committee, as written in the report, that we were not being made available the information and release the source, which is necessary for zoning of the evacuation, but we could have utilized something else. But on that, we are to be newly established regulatory agency will be responsible for speedy. So that's the consideration being made.
Concerning speedy, while the people have already had a lot of information, I'm pretty sure that you already know a lot of things. So thank you for your explanation. Well, Dr. Sakiyama, any comment? Any questions? Well, you gave us a lot of detailed explanation. I read this interim report, and concerning the policies that so far have been carried forward by the MEXT ministry, and the safety and security that was taught to children because of this accident, that was all broken down. And you didn't refer to them at all. How come you didn't touch upon this in the report? And within the MEXT, nothing has been discussed in the ministry? That's my question. Concerning this first or primary report, I focused on the overall undertaking by the MEXT, especially how to respond in the case of emergency, earthquake, tsunami, nuclear disaster. It was a complex disaster. To that complex disaster, the MEXT as a whole, how did we respond to that? So emergency response was the focal point. But going forward, you might actually refer to that. Concerning the response in the case in the nuclear matter, we would like to delve into detail. We would like to validate them. In the Dr. Hatamura's report, it was also mentioned the monitoring data was known. It was known, but it was not communicated to the people who lived in the region, in the communities. What is your perspective? And there are many children who are exposed to radiation. Concerning the examination of such children, that was conducted in a much delayed fashion. How do you explain that? First, concerning the monitoring data, before March 15th, based on the headquarters at the locality, the monitoring was conducted. But as I said, because of tsunami and the earthquake, monitoring itself was insufficient. The offsite itself was the part of the exclusion zone, and the press release was not possible. March 16th and onwards, it has been conducted by MEXT, but those monitoring personnel, to those people, the residents actually asked them, but it's true that they didn't give any particular instruction when they were asked of that question. So the people who were doing the monitoring, their job was to monitor them, and they did not actually communicate to the citizens. I think there were such people, but because of those voices from the local areas, when there was a request, then we could post the data or we could write it down. Those are the requests we made to the monitoring personnel. We did make press releases. It was available on the homepage, but those evacuees, they cannot have access to television. They can't use the internet. On that occasion, even if we posted on the homepage, that doesn't mean the publishing. That's the point that was made to us, and they are right. In the case of complex disaster, such as this one, with the earthquake and the tsunami, how to communicate to the evacuees is one of the major issues. Regarding the examination on children, as I said before, March 23rd, Nuclear Safety Commission conducted a reverse evaluation on the speedy. The examination of children who are in the likely high radiation dose area, such examination was conducted by the headquarters on the nuclear disaster. That's my understanding. About the 20 millisieverts issue on children. First, the MEXT says that it will be from the Nuclear Safety Commission, NAIC, and the NAIC said that no, they don't remember that they said such a thing. So who made this decision? How it was decided? Please explain. Although it's a bit different from what you have just asked, I think you are referring to the standard to utilize the schoolyards. Power 3.8 microsieverts. If it's higher than that, there should be limitation in the use of the schoolyard. To have this 3.8 microsieverts per year, the 20 millisieverts, that value was used for the calculation. The disaster Measures headquarters asked for the advice from the NSC. Based on that, the advice, the MEXT sent notice to educational institutes. NSC said they didn't provide any advice. They did offer advice on this. I think what they are referring to is that they didn't remember that they said that 20 millisieverts was a sievert. That's what the NSC has been saying, and it was not the standard. Concerning this issue, 3.8 microsieverts per hour or higher, with the school years has that kind of a value, then the limitations would be placed on the usage. But based on the calculation, per year 20 millisieverts, that number, people thought that number was the standard in terms of the communication. So in the initial communication, perhaps there was a problem, and that's one of the things that have been pointed out by many people in risky communication. It's not that we said that if it's 20 millisieverts or higher, it's no good, and if it's less than 20 millisieverts, it's okay. That's not what we said. It was used as one of the numbers for the calculations concerning the usage of the school years. The way it was explained was insufficient. That was one of the points made regarding the wording. Yes, I think we should reflect upon ourselves. The NSC, it's saying that they didn't say that the 20 millisieverts per year was a standard. We know that, and we don't think that's the standard either. About the 3.8, that number, based on what this 3.8 was derived from? 3.8, concerning that, first looking at the 20 millisieverts per year, outside of home spending 8 hours, and inside home staying 16 hours. Based on that assumption that if you account the multiple discount rate, then 3.8 per hour. That's without justification. It's not that the per year 20 millisieverts, it's not the standard. Whether one can use the schoolyard or not, it's not the standard. Just as one rough indicator, 3.8 microsieverts per hour was indicated as a rough indication. But if one uses the word standard, if it's higher than that, then no, and if it's less than that, when that kind of the approach is taken, then that's a standard. So in that context, 3.8 microsievert is not the standard. 3.8 microsievert per hour is just one rough indication in the use of the schoolyard. That's what it says in the paper. But in various places, it was considered as a standard. And the way it was explained, we should have been more careful about the way it was explained. I have a different question, actually. The people from TEPCO, when they said that it's safe to the society, but within the company, they considered the possible risks and they come up with the measures. But at MEXT, did you consider that nuclear power stations were safe? Or did you think that there were some risks and things could happen? And concerning the accident management manual, in the case of the emergency response, did you have those accident management manual? I think it's true for all the people who are involved in nuclear power. In nuclear, there are potential risks involved, but with various measures, we are trying careful that those risks will not be revealed and safety is ensured. I think that's the understanding or the recognition of many people. At the MEXT, concerning the accident management approach, for commercial nuclear reactors, MEXT is not in charge of safety regulations. As we said before, concerning nuclear disaster prevention, there is a basic plan concerning various disaster prevention, and also there are various manuals compiled concerning the disaster prevention. Even it's unlikely to happen, but should it happen, how should we respond to them? Yes, there was such a manual. I wouldn't call that accident management. But should that happen, about the response, it was covered. However, in the complex disaster like this one, it didn't work all that well, so we should really reflect upon ourselves. In terms of the time axis, within 1 hour, within 1 day, within 1 week, is it really described in that kind of a detail? In the existing disaster prevention manual, within 1 hour, within 1 day, it's not described in such a manner. So within certain hour, the certain action should be taken. That's not how it's described. That is right, especially in the case of the complex disaster such as this one, within 1 day or within 1 week, rather than those, depending on the situation, we need to respond to the matter in a flexible manner. Under the Nuclear Safety Agency system, I understand that there will be many discussions that will take place, but in the process, I think that flexibility will become one of the important issues. About emergency management, I'm talking about medical services, emergency radiation exposure medical, the tertiary medical facilities, the entire East Japan is covered by the National Institute of Radiological Sciences. At this institute, how many people, the patients can they accommodate at the NIRS? Excuse me, regarding how many patients can be accommodated, I don't have the numbers. It's about 5 or 6 patients as I look at their homepage. But for instance, if there is an accident where for instance, 100 people may be exposed to radiation exposure, those accidents could happen in the future. The secondary medical facilities, in the case of Fukushima Prefecture, it's a Fukushima Prefectural Medical University. But in the case of decontamination process, if there's a decontamination process, there's a contaminated water, and contaminated water must be stored. And the rule stipulates that, but are there facilities to store the water? I understand that the NIRS, they have such facilities, but other than the NIRS, are the medical facilities that are in charge of the emergency radiation exposure medical services, do they have such facilities? Not at all facilities, but some facilities do have that kind of equipment, but some don't. How many have such equipment? Excuse me, I don't have that kind of information at my hands concerning the exact number. Please come back to us later then. I'm the Commissioner Nomura. Going back to Speedy, I'm sorry to go back to the Speedy. I have a question. To the extent where we know the Speedy information was available overseas, and based on that, certain actions were taken overseas, as I heard. Were MEXT aware of that? For Japanese citizens, it was not published, but overseas, that information was available, and based on the assumptions made based on simulation data, certain measures were taken. According to the report, it wasn't a fact. If that's a fact, and if the MEXT were aware of that, there is a gap in the information accessibility, did you take any measures? As I said, the Speedy information was made public at the end of April, and people said that this was too late. But as the emergency response, for instance, the ministry, the information was provided, and also to the United States and US military service information was conveyed via Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but we didn't know that it was available to the foreign governments, and we were not aware that it was available to foreign institutes. Various countries using their own data sources, they conducted various simulations. Because of the report, we are aware of that. Perhaps I didn't ask the question in the right way. Via Defense Ministry, the information was available to the US. When were you aware of that? When did you know about that? To the U.S. military, via Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that speed information was available. We knew that. When did you know that? Oh, excuse me, that it was available to the American military service, so it was available to the U.S. government. Of course. When did you know that? It was provided to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on the 14th of March. So concerning whether it was going to be published or not, the specific decision was not made on the March 15th, March 16th, and about the publication. Within the MEXT, it was decided that this publication or not would be left to the NAIC, but it was already made public. It was already available to the U.S. military and the U.S. government. You knew that, am I right? Via Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the information was provided because of the necessity to receive the support. That was not for the publication. So whether about the publication or publishing on the March 16th, it was mainly handled by the NSC, so METI, the NSC, the MEXT, about whether to publish or not. That was studied on that occasion. And there are various organizations involved, and the headquarters handling the nuclear disaster, the headquarters as a whole would study that. And the Prime Minister's office was also consulted, and because of that, it was rather late when it was decided to be made public. Just one impression, you talked about the standard, the rough indicator, the communication and publishing. You just evaded the question by using different words from the public's perspective. It's actually the same. Even it was just the rough indicator, it was a standard. Whether that was actually the justification, 20 millisieverts was the standard or not, it's very clear. Don't play with words, whether it's a rough indicator, standard, publication, communication. Don't talk about those things going forward, please. Just my impression.
Perhaps you may know of this already. The MEXT, because of this magnitude of complex disasters, I can understand that there are chaotic situation in many places that could not be avoided. But when did you plan and establish the system for SPEEDY? When? We have started our research into SPEEDY from 1986. And the budget approximately in total is about 11.6 billion yen. So you did have distinctive purpose, right, in establishing the system, right? Yes, we did have certain purpose. At the very end of the handout, we have some pamphlet attached. On the very right-hand side, there is the explanation how to use the SPEEDY. So we did expect these things, and to establish the evacuation zones. And to be more specific, the SPEEDY data we used as basic the data in establishing the evacuation zones on the municipality basis. But because emergency was so fast, we were not able to use that system, and we had to just determine the concentric evacuation zones. Did you have some practice and drills? Yes, we did have disaster preparedness drills, not on a virtual basis, but did you have actual drills? Yes, we did have actual drills, and we used these drawings, the so-called keyhole in the center. The keyhole, the shape, the zone was established, and we would communicate and consult with the local community and try to think about the zoning by municipality, my towns and villages at the very bottom. To what extent we will have the evacuation, and to what extent to just stay indoors. So that is the drills to be conducted on normal times. But then in case of emergency where telephone lines have been broken down and even cell phones cannot be connected, and as Dr. Hatamura's the committee has decided, there are many problems and challenges. We need to share those views, and Mr. Watanabe and you and others need to investigate how we can learn the lessons and try to make use of what we have learned and found. And in any case, thank you very much for coming and give us your comments. From the Japanese people's point of view, and since we have Ms. Hachiska with us, I wanted to have her comment at the very end. But in any case, we have always listened to her comments. I hope that Mr. Watanabe and others, you need to listen to the public, and you should try to cooperate with us going forward as well. This is the end of the hearing. This is the very first round of the hearings. Not just the hearing process, but we will communicate with you going forward through working groups and so forth. So I would like to solicit your continued support. Thank you. Now this is the third. We would like to adjourn the meeting. It was very cold today, but in Tohoku region it must be much colder. In any case, we would like to end our meeting. The next meeting is planned on the 30th of January. For the details, we will inform you at a later date. I would like to thank all the participants. Thank you, commissioners. Thank you, the supporting staff. Thank you, everyone. This is the end of our meeting. Thank you.